Ken Grillo, and I'm here for my wife, Joan Shannon, to say a few words about Bob later.
Peter Stisser, just visiting.
Dennis McCarthy.
I'm Catherine Shaw. I'm the city's chief administrative officer.
I'm Mark Barlow. I'm a North District City Councilor.
Shawnee Corey. I'm the NPA public engagement specialist with City of Burlington.
I'm Norm Fisher, a long-term friend of Bob's.
Nice.
I am Tiki Archambault, resident of Ward 2.
Ready. Thank everyone for coming out tonight. There are plenty of other things we could have done on Wednesday evening, but you chose to be here, and we're grateful for that. So tonight is a little bit of a somber occasion for us. We're going to begin the meeting with a remembrance of our big friend and colleague, Bob Kiernan, a member of our steering committee, passed away suddenly and unexpectedly in late October. So to kick that off, I'm going to turn the floor and the microphone over to Ken Grillo, who will be making a statement on behalf of City Councilor Joan Shannon, with whom Bob had worked quite closely on a number of issues. So, and then after Councilor Shannon's statement, we'll go around the room and get the opportunity to kind of reflect on Bob and say a few words. So, Ken, you're up.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, my name is Ken Grillo. I'm Joan Shannon's husband, and she is at the Police Academy this evening, which is a Wednesday event every week this month, and very sorry that she can't be here. So she asked me to speak these words in her behalf, and it's written as if she was saying it. So just want you to realize that. Bob Kiernan was a very dear friend and supporter, not only of me personally and politically, but of our many common causes that we worked on together. News of his passing was heartbreaking to me and left me in tears. Bob was optimistic, practical, always willing to volunteer. But when Bob volunteered, he did not ask, "How can I help?" But instead he offered, "This is what I can do to be helpful. Is it helpful to you?" That may not be what you want to hear from every volunteer, but with Bob, those offerings were consistently well-targeted and truly very helpful. Looking back at my email communications, my first encounter with Bob was in an email to the council and mayor, thanking us for moving forward with improvements to the City Hall Park. As you might imagine, my first email from most constituents is often about complaints rather than compliments. So Bob was very liberal with his gratitude, and I was very grateful for that. Over the years, he weighed in on a broad spectrum of civic issues, engaging individual counselors on the issues and initiatives that were important to them and to him. These included Everyone Loves a Parade mural, GMT transit policy changes, non-citizen voting, F-35s, COVID masks and related health regulations, food distribution efforts, downtown business improvement district, graffiti, Sears Lane evictions, the homelessness, drug use, and he was an unabashed supporter of Ted Kenney's for state's attorney campaign. These emails generally opened with respect for opposing viewpoints, and then proceeded to lobby for middle ground, as he was a strong voice of and for our community. Chastised us for polarizing issues around BPD back in 2019. He felt we could have approached the issue on common ground of both appreciation for our police and acknowledgement that there was room for improvement without any vilification. Bob led with the kindness and compassion of someone who has lived many lives and could look at issues from a range of perspectives. I don't, in fact, know his personal history that well, but that was always the impression he gave me. I always felt I had much to learn from his sage example of presenting his viewpoint without animosity to the viewpoint of others. During my campaign, he introduced me and many, many others to the delicious food at La Liguras, which he loved to eat at. He was incredibly generous with his time, and anything that he had, he shared with others. I highly recommend you try Lollygoose and give a nod to Bob while you're there. I had seen Bob just the day before his passing, sitting on a bench in Church Street, where I often could find him sitting. We exchanged quick hellos, and I am left longing for more. His pale blue eyes that saw straight through my soul are etched forever in memory of him. I will think of him every time I pass that bench as a reminder to communicate disagreements with much more kindness, as he always did. With my signature and many tears, Joan. I also want to add that I got to know Bob during the campaign, and we share a common interest, and he was a very long profession on his part of doing sound for some big time people, including Frank Sinatra. So we had many great conversations about that, and I will miss him as well. I do say.
Apparently, Frank Sinatra here. Jeez, I'm not singing. Thank you. A brief background to set the scene for me. In 2021, I entered the city council race for the Central District. It was the heart of the pandemic, and I was fired up about running. And at that time, all campaigning had to be done by phone. There was no door knocking, no gatherings, no kissing babies. My politics were at that time best represented as an independent, though with an endorsement from the Democratic Party, which welcomed me at that time, despite the fact that I had chaired the Burlington Progressives for 4 years on 2 separate decades, and even worked with Chris a little bit too. It's under this premise that I met Bob Kiernan. He was one of many people that I chatted with, but what made Bob stand out to me amid the hundreds of calls that I made was his excitement for my race and dedicated follow-up calls to talk about anything and everything. He turned out to be one of my most valuable volunteers. In the end, I lost, just end of that story, by the way. And that was okay, because it really allowed me to do 2 things at that time. One was to give people an outlet. If you recall, we were all cooped up in our homes, and it was hard to be so isolated, and especially for someone like Bob, who had no family in town, right? And that's kind of what sparked our friendship. But number 2 was I got to meet new people in the city who genuinely care. It wasn't just me all fired up about these issues. It was folks like Bob, fired up in different ways and kinder ways, as I think Joan had described in her write-up. Bob became a friend from that campaign. We had irregular brunch get-togethers, and he stayed in touch with random texts and phone calls. And in the hustle of my own life and where things are at, I found it difficult to be as responsive as I would have liked. Don't we all have those types of regrets? But knew Bob would take no offense. We would just pick up where we left off at any given time. He was always incredibly friendly, supportive, kind, never slinging mud, more trying to find that middle ground, as Joan stated very well. He never forgot a detail of my life, and even sent a text last fall, shortly before he passed, just to check in to see how my volleyball officiating was going. So I was neck deep in that stuff. So he knew of that, and he wanted to check in with me on that. He also he volunteered alongside me, I say ad nauseum, during the 2024 town meeting day election on behalf of Joan. So he and I were what we called super volunteers, and tried to do what we could to volunteer in that campaign. It felt like a lot of times it was just him and me in that office, although of course there were others. But we were just having fun, making phone calls, greeting our neighbors, and just really chit-chatting, right? There's a script they give you in those things, but you follow it sometimes. But mostly you're just chatting with your neighbors out there, and Bob was just supremely excellent at that. He could talk to anybody. When I zoom out, and sorry for that. When I zoom out and reflect on Bob, it became a picture of humanity. So we weren't best friends, and we both struggled to lay out each other's history. We didn't know each other that well. But Bob was so kind. He was personable. He could read a room like a pro, and he was tech savvy, as I was talking to Norm with about. We'd give tips to everybody about where to go for juicy gossip or what the latest council news was, because he would watch the whole meeting, and it was something that I just didn't have the stamina for, even though I ran. And when I think about knowing how his life ended, just alone and a little bit in obscurity, not really alone, but yet alone, it just gives me pause and reflection. Is there something I could have done to help prevent that outcome? What does it say about my priorities in life? And how does such a well-regarded man with a moral core of decency to his soul through life, just pass along with, in Burlington here, where he felt just so big to me, just kind of ends in a blip like that. Will that be me in the end? So these are some of my reflections. What I reflect on most, and I hope this is true for Bob, and I just hope that he was happy. I felt like he was. He was always decent. He was always kind. So I feel like someone who's unhappy is not those traits. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Whatever the case, the answers will elude me. I do want to put Bob on the map as best as I can. I can state unequivocally that Burlington lost a man with a deep passion for this city. This man was loved by those who had the honor of being in his aura in his final years, and he returned that love with a smile and recitation of things important to those people. And I think, just to end, as we can reflect, and if we can say that if Bob's death causes us to reflect, then we can also say that his passing has kind of given us a new life as well. So thank you. Would you like to speak?
Yes,
Here's a microphone for you.
sure. Well, I met Bob on July 31st, 2018. And it started a historic struggle that we had to keep the mural, stop it from being taken down. And there are a lot of things I can say about that. We'd go to city council meetings and I'd speak or he'd speak and we'd write letters. But I decided today I was going to look at the notes because I was approaching the whole issue of the attack on the mural from a scholarly standpoint. And I had a whole file called the mural file. It actually includes a lot of stuff other than the mural. And I remembered basically what happened on July 31st, but I learned a lot, including Bob's tech savviness. Because the way I remember the meeting, it was the last meeting of the panel, and in that meeting, it was proven, and would be proven particularly later by what happened at that meeting, not that anybody remembers it other than me, that the panel was a fraud. What happened is there was one member, and one thing I didn't find in my notes was what his name is, but I think I can find it, who wanted to vote because he wanted to vote to not remove the panel. And the chairperson, Wang Wang, said there was not going to be a vote. There never was a vote, as a matter of fact. And what happened then is at the August 13th meeting of the city council, and some of you might remember this, Kurt Wright asked questions, but the report was written by one of Mayor Weinberger's legal team and simply skipped over the fact that there was never a vote. The panel never decided, in fact, to take down the mural. Well, at any rate, the thing I discovered that I didn't realize I had was a note to the effect that Bob, who was really technically savvy, had dug in, and he thought it was quite a job, and made an audio of that meeting. Now, I have it on my AOL favorites, but I couldn't get it to make a sound. And at any rate, I still think that I can give it, that I can find it sometime. But I just wanted to give this background here because we worked together. There were a lot of other things about Bob that I'd like to say. Bob was a German with an Irish name. I'm an Irishman with a German name, Norm Fisher. And I'm sure that we were quite a pair as we went to city council meetings and talked and so on and so forth. And we ran into the same sort of things that people would assume that because we were against taking down the mural, we were maybe racist or something like this. And it sort of fell off our backs like water off a duck's back. As I say, Bob was an Irishman, and he loved Vince Gill's recording of The Streets of Laredo, which is really an Irish song, as some of you know. As a matter of fact, when my older sister died 2 years ago, I got one of my daughters to sing the Irish original, the Bard of Amag. And we actually played a record of the Johnny Cash third part of it, which is We Are the Shepherds, it's a Christmas song. But The Streets of Laredo is a song that Bob and I both loved in the Vince Gill version, when Vince Gill sings The Bard of Amag in The Streets of Laredo. And I have a slight variation on the opening part that I'm going to sing. As I walked out on the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, I spied an old cowboy, all dressed in white linen, all dressed in white linen, as cold as the clay.
And I learned a lot from him during that. And what I had learned is that Bob had lived on Church Street here in downtown for 25 years. He was a steadfast and tireless supporter of the downtown and neighborhood, and really cared about the city and wanted to make it livable for everybody and give everybody a voice in the process. When we got talking about the NPA, he felt very strongly that we needed to have our own NPA so that Ward 3 could have its own voice. And when we had a meeting to talk about it, Bob was the one who made the motion from the floor to give us our independence. And if it weren't for Bob, we would not be here today. There would be no Ward 3 NPA without Bob Kiernan. And for that, I am very grateful. But I'm also grateful for the life lessons that he had shared with me. Bob was a little bit older than me, and I'm a bit of a kind of guy with a lot of ideas, a little bit all over the place. And Bob was really good about keeping me on task and keeping me focused on the task at hand here in the NPA. And then remarked on a couple of occasions, he's like, yeah, you remind me of like me when I was younger. And he's like, I'm trying to share, some of the things I've learned so that I can maybe save you some hassle down the line. And, I really appreciated that. And, he told some of his stories about show business. He talked about a little bit about his time when he lived in Las Vegas. And, he knew that I was a pretty big hockey fan, and he proceeded to tell me a tale about when he was working a show outside of Washington, D.C. in the arena that was the home to the Washington Capitals hockey team. And as it turned out, I believe this particular event was in the early 80s, and it had something to do with President Ronald Reagan. And he said, yeah, he asked him, is there any way you could delay the start of the game by a half hour to accommodate the president? He said, nope. no way, we're not going to delay the start of the game. And then he's like, and they wouldn't. And the Caps game went on as scheduled. And, we did our thing and made the best of it. And I really enjoyed those stories, talking to Bob and the lessons that he shared with me. He really did a lot to help us get to where we are here as the NPA. He cared deeply about our community, as so many of the folks here tonight have said. And I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to have worked with him in this time. So I wish I had more time, but such is not the case. So, and I think when I get home tonight, I'm going to put on some Vince Gill and listen to the Streets of Laredo. So thank you. Okay. We're a little behind schedule now, but I think got the important stuff out of the way. Councilor Mark Barlow is up next with a presentation on the city budget, and he's going to have an assist from the city's chief administrative officer, Kathleen Shad. So the two of them will be giving us a rundown of what we're looking at here for the fiscal 2026 budget. So without further ado, we'll get that called up on the screen for the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Councilor Barlow and CAO Shad.
Well, thank you, Chris. When Chris first asked me to come here, I don't know, it was like probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. I didn't have much to say. All we had known from at that time is that we were looking at another structural budget gap for FY26. As you all probably know, we had a sizable one in FY25 that we're in now that had to be closed through a series of measures that were taken up last year, and we're in a similar situation this year. So that's sort of all I knew, is that we had this thing that was a gap of between, we were told, $8 and $12 million. So I'm very happy to be able to come to you with more than that tonight. At our Board of Finance meeting on this past Monday, CAO Catherine Shad gave us more information in the form of a presentation. It's all very preliminary still, and it's subject to quite a bit of change, but we're starting to see the contours of a way to close that gap. So I was going to use her presentation and take bits and pieces of it because I didn't have one of my own. And then lo and behold, tonight, as I sit down here, Catherine walked into the room. So I'm going to sort of walk us through sort of the, I guess, the most important parts of this. And I'm going to give CIO Shad the latitude to correct me or interrupt me as we go along here. And so we could go. So this is the presentation we were given on Monday. If we can go to maybe the next slide. Okay, good. And so, as I said, last year we had a $9 million budget gap that we closed. And one of the ways we did that was we had one-time funds that were left over from all of the federal ARPA money that we had. And over the last 3 successive years, we've continued to use less and less of that. And we don't have much of it left. This year, the administration so far has told us that the intention is to use $1.3 million worth of one-time money. 300,000 of that about is what Catherine had called the quarters in the couch pieces of the ARPA funds that we've been spending down. I think there was maybe $27 million to start with. So we have 300,000 there, and we have another $1 million of one-time money that we'll be able to use that is later in this presentation, but that's going to be a piece of closing the budget gap this year. Also, we've been getting regular updates from the CAO at Board of Finance on how we're performing budget to actual, which is something that we've started doing new this year. And lastly, there's a commitment to a more sustainable long-term strategies to provide predictable information for taxpayers. So do you have anything more to add on this or?
No.
Okay. So next slide, please. And so we can keep going. So the assumptions on building the budget this year, which the CAO and her office are doing is that we'll have, like we said on the first slide, 3.5. One-time revenue. Oh, last year we used $3.5 million of one-time revenue. So in order, this year, we either have to build that into the structural budget or we have to replace it with other one-time revenue. We also, last year, to close the structural budget gap, we had levied gross receipts tax increases, specifically around restaurants and bars. And we had levied 0.5% that we were going to sunset at the end of this budget year. And so one of the assumptions on this FY26 budget is that we won't do that. And there's no decisions have been made about that, but that's one of the assumptions in this initial modeling. I know that the discussions with there's some counselors that want to have that conversation still. The other thing that's happened is all the departments in the city, and I think there's like 18 of them, have been asked to level fund their budgets as a first step. And so when they level fund their budgets, because most of I think like 80% of our expenses in the city, almost 80% are related to personnel, wages and benefits. And because most of our employees are union employees, they have cost of living allowances or COLAs that are built into their contracts every year. And they have these things called steps. So there's automatic increases every year for years of service. So essentially, a 4% reduction for each department is going to be, it's going to be significant in terms of the impact to those departments, and they're going to end up having to find those, however they can. And I think they're just coming up with those ideas now.
Yep.
Still.
Mm-hmm.
I can't read that up there, so I'm going to go to my version here. The other thing that was an assumption that no new projects or initiatives are included in the budget this year. So we're going to, stay the course, do what we're doing, not try to stand up any new initiatives or projects. And we're going to try to prioritize affordability for taxpayers.
I would just add on this budget that although we asked every department to level fund their budget and they came to us with their initial ideas, every department was able to do that except for fire and police. And I think you kind of intuitively, I see people nodding, can understand why that is. But because those departments uniquely have to provide safe staffing levels, and even more than the 80%, those departments are almost 100% fixed costs. So while we all notice that we don't have as many police officers as we used to or as we would like, it does not come with as many cost savings as you might think. And so there are those fixed costs. So we are not able to keep those departments level funded unless we reduce the number of police officers, which no one wants, or firefighters, which I think we also don't want. Additionally, of the $3.5 million of one-time revenue we used in last year's budget, most of it, $2.4 million, was used split evenly between the police and fire budgets. That was ARPA money from the federal government. And as Mark mentioned, we only think we have about $300,000 for this coming year. So that is $2.4 million of that one-time funds that we know we definitely need to use. And so we'll have to use our own resources to make up that money.
Next slide, please. And so the drivers, as we mentioned, are these $3.5 million in one-time revenue that we need to replace or reduce expenses for. The other thing that's happened that's significant is health insurance costs. Health insurance inflation has always been running higher than normal inflation, and it is again this year. Our costs are rising 11% this year. And the city's self-insured. So, and I know that from what I've heard in the news, there's Blue Cross Blue Shield policies that are going up as much as 20%. And so even though this is sort of a shocker, it's actually not as bad as some of the other increases people are seeing in health insurance. And the other thing is, as Catherine mentioned, a lot of this one-time revenue that we need to replace is associated with the fire and police budgets. The fire and police budgets comprise almost 40% of our city budgets. And again, a lot of those are employee costs. The other thing that's noteworthy about the fire and police budgets is that both of those departments, they're the unions and those that staff those departments, they're up for contract renewal this year. So there's negotiations that are ongoing, and there's a lot of unknowns about where those labor negotiations will go. Want to say anything more about that, or?
Oh, I think, in most years, we have a contract, so we know when we start the budget process, you take last year's payroll and you add 3% or 2%. But this year, we don't know where we'll land for fire and police. And so that does add a lot more uncertainty since they make up 40% of our budget. We can make some educated guesses, but that adds a little bit more variability as we're talking about the budget and a possible gap.
Next slide, please. And so other considerations in the budget this year is all departments have submitted initial draft budgets. But there's still some fine tuning that needs to go on with that process. Like we said earlier, we can only make guesses and informed estimates about what'll happen with the police and fire union negotiations. And the insurance numbers, the 11% estimate on increases this year are again an estimate, and that may fluctuate a little bit. So with all of those sort of considerations, next slide, next two slides, please. On the expense side, we know that the FY 26 budgets are increasing about $5 to $6 million from the FY 25 budgets. 89% of that increase is from fire and police, and the other 11% is made up of smaller ads for like, for instance, the increased security that we have for public safety at the libraries, and some other small investments we've made around the city, including, like, for example, the case management system at the city attorney's office.
We did not pay the fire chief to come in right when we were talking about how much more we have to pay for fire.
89% was.
Yeah, I saw you stop. I thought that was great.
Welcome, Chief LaChance. Thank you.
So that was $5 to $6 million of additional. And then next slide, you got, yes. And in addition to that, they're expecting $2 million more of expense. And that would be for things like additional health insurance costs, truing up FY 24 health insurance with workers' compensation, and vacancies in general fund departments, enforcing general fund department vacancies, and a small buffer for the negotiations we mentioned earlier. When you add up all of that, it's about $7.5 million of expenses that we need to cover. And so remember that number. And then we'll go on to the revenues, which are two more slides, please. Okay. And so in order to offset that $7.5 million of revenue or of expense, we need to find additional revenue. And so there's been about $3 million of additional revenue identified in the following areas. The last of the ARPA money we mentioned a couple times, it's about $300,000. We're in a unique situation in FY 26 in that we're retiring the waterfront TIF district, which costs about $1 million a year to administrate. But we're also in the last year of the business personal property tax collection which we think we've got about $1 million. So we'll have that this year. The business personal property tax goes away next year. And so we won't have it. So it's essentially one-time money. And that, if you take that million, add it to the 300,000, that's the 1.3 million in one-time money we have to add to the budget this year. There's also the enforcing of the all the vacancies in the general fund departments, enforcing 5% vacancies. And could you add to that? Because I guess I don't quite understand how that would work.
Yes. We have had a inconsistent approach across our departments about how we use vacancy. And so vacancy is, you can assume that all of your positions are filled for the entire year, but that's not usually realistic. Perhaps in a small department, you may know we only have 3 people in our assessor's department. So it may be realistic that all 3 of them would stay. But in a much larger department like Department of Public Works or Parks, where you have many people, upward of 50, closer to 100 full-time positions, there's certainly going to be turnover. And so we've done some historical analysis of what does that average across the city so that we can factor that in and we aren't overtaxing people, assuming that we're going to have 100% fill rate when actually it looks like we have closer to 95%. I do want to point out the except police and fire. We had a very interesting conversation with both chiefs who let us know that it's just not realistic for us to be able to count on that in those public safety departments, similar to what we talked about before of not being able to level fund those budgets. But our experience shows in the other departments, that's something of a savings. And so we include it here in revenue. Of course, it's not money coming in, but it's savings from what we had predicted in those additional expenses.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because I needed that as well. Additionally, the grand list continues to grow. So we have organic growth in the grand list. It's about like 0.5% a year or something like that. And so in addition to those, now for the tax part, last year voters approved a 3-cent public safety tax, and the city only used 2% of the authorized 2 cents of the authorized 3 cents. So this year, the intention to help close this budget gap is to use the other authorized penny. And additionally, there's on your property tax bill, there's a number of what's called splinter taxes. It's not just one tax, but there's a number of tax rates in there. One of them is specifically dedicated to parks. And so without voter authorization, the city has charter authority to increase that tax. Or so that's the understanding right now. There was a question in the Board of Finance whether or not around that authority and how much. But assuming that's accurate, the intention is to use 1 penny from that splinter tax too. So that would, both of those tax increases would, and I didn't know what the total was on those. Do you know what that? It's okay. This was 675,000
Yes,
last year.
it is about the same. It's a little bit more.
So that would be like 1.3 million or
Mhm.
something in that range of increased revenue. So all of that, the things just described on this page add up to about $3 million. So we're down to about $4.5 million of a gap that still needs to be filled. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so in order to, right now, there's no intention of recommending a general city property tax rate increase, which would require voter approval. But we'd use these other 2 taxes, and we'd also meet our obligations that we always have to for Green Mountain Transit, the debt service, and the retirement. those things we don't have any discretion over. We're required by statute to pay those every year as they increase. And so with all of that, the two taxes we're talking about, just, discretionary taxes that we're talking about increasing along with these other dedicated taxes that we don't have the discretion over. Municipal tax rate would be projected to go up 6 to 7%. And by comparison, it went up 11% last year. So it's less, but it's still a bit. And so if we can go ahead a couple more slides. And so there's an initiative underway in the administration called Modern Gov. It came out of the efficiency study that we had a consultant create for us that had some recommendations on ways to find efficiencies in the organization, the city's organization. And the administration is looking, and we haven't seen any of those yet. That's still TBD, and I think we're going to hear about it on the 27th.
Hopefully the 27th.
On the 27th of this month, we're going to hear about some of the ideas the administration has for right sizing, I guess would be maybe a term to use, city government. Out of that, there is an intention to save $1 to $1.5 million. So I guess I don't want to say much more about that because I don't know anything more than that about that. Like I say, this is all sort of very preliminary, even coming to you here tonight. And so if we could go ahead. In addition to that, though, right now there's a process that's underway in the city to have departments sort of catalog what services they provide in the city, and it's what's being called a service inventory. And then once we have all of that, we're going to try to prioritize what services are the most important, and then maybe use that to inform additional cost-saving efforts in the city. And so that's all that's still underway, right? That's still in sort of in the data collection phase. So next slide, please. So we're almost getting to the end here.
We are at the end.
So no tax increase on the ballot, although there's still a 6 to 7% municipal tax increase anticipated based on the current modeling. Lots of discussion to be had still. And the next and last slide is, so going forward, there'll be continued discussions probably at Board of Finance and certainly at Board of Finance on a regular basis, less frequently at City Council probably. We're going to talk about the service inventory, if service inventory is that materializes, refine and review departmental budgets, and then continue to look for ways to squish down the remaining. There's still $3 million in that budget gap that we have to find somewhere. And so that's going to be the work of the administration and partnership with the city council to sort that out in the next few months. And so that's sort of what we have for you right now. Like I say, it's all very preliminary. It's hot off the press of this week. And I guess we could take questions if there's time.
Yeah, absolutely. Who wants to lead off? Mr. Archambault?
I saw in a recent auditor's report about Burlington, for lack of a better word, shortchanging the TIF funding to the tune of, I don't know, about 300,000 or so. I can't remember the exact figure. I just wondered if that is calculated into figures and if that's a whole separate discussion.
So interesting that we have Ashley Parker here, who is here to speak about our general obligation bond, but she also happens to manage our TIF program. Ashley, are you okay if I put you on the spot to handle that?
Can I also, I'm a school board member, I'm Jeannie Walls. Can you also talk about the correlation of TIF funding and the education? Educational funding group.
Whatever you're.
We have the room till 9.
Back to me.
All right, I will do my best. TIF is my favorite thing. Can you repeat your main question one more time? I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking first.
Just seeing the auditor's report suggesting that Burlington was short of funding regarding TIF. There were 2 separate occasions I think he mentioned. One was 100,000, and the other one was, I want to say 200,000, if I understood right. So I was just wondering if that came into play with budget considerations or how that worked out.
All right, that's what I thought you were saying, but thank you. Actually, we can respond to this. Recently, we just confirmed completion of the amount that was owed. So the one about $100,000 was from the downtown TIF audit. And that one, we just finalized all the approved transactions. I can't remember when we went to Board of Finance City Council, but it was within the last few months. So that one is done. That one's been taken care of and has no impact in FY26. Same, well, I don't want to say the same with the, well, no, okay. Now I'm going to back up. I'm getting everything confused. The state ed fund is slightly different. So we had about 100,000 that we just paid in terms of internal bookkeeping allocations. We are working with VEPC to determine the process actually for repaying the state ed fund in those 2 instances. It's tricky because I don't know how long ago this occurred, but the state came up with a separate guidance for VEPC to actually lead municipalities through the repayment process up for the state ed fund when audits found this specific issue. And VEPC is undergoing new leadership, and they don't know what this process is. So we're working with them. It could come a couple of different ways. So we're still waiting to actually hear how that's gonna end up looking. So I'm not really sure. I don't have a great answer.
I can confidently say that any money that should need to be repaid does have to come from a different source, and that would come from our unassigned fund balance. So shortly, probably on the 27th of January, at our Board of Finance meeting, we will be reporting out on last year's audit, our FY24 audit. Our fiscal year ends on June 30th, and then it takes about 6 months for the audit to finish. And then sometime, usually around now, we report back to the Board of Finance. Our unassigned fund balance is healthy. That's our rainy day fund. You know, it's like the extra money you put into savings in case something happens. And this is the in case something happens. We never want to raid that fund, but we have it, and it would not affect next year's budget, is the bottom line.
Yeah, and that is where the waterfront payment would come from, is what Catherine's talking about. Because TIF is so complicated, the downtown payment to the ed fund would come from our increment, which is a separate pot of money, which is only for the purpose of paying our debt service and small amount of related costs, which includes some personnel time and some other administrative functions. So yes, neither of those things would impact the FY26 budget. So I apologize for the long, weird, complicated.
No, it's okay. And regarding the
Yeah,
ed fund.
I mean, like essentially it could though, well, not, there isn't a real direct correlation, but that money goes into the ed fund, and what is in the ed fund determines what gets allocated to different towns for educating students. And therefore, so what we get from the state essentially allows the school district to ask for either less or more, depending on what we get from the state. So paying into the ed fund does relieve all taxpayers the cost of educating kids.
And for those of you who are not familiar, VEPC, VEPC stands for the Vermont Economic Progress Council. And if I recall correctly, the city place development just across the way is actually technically part of the waterfront TIF, if that's correct. Sounds like a gerrymandered TIF, but.
Yeah, and Catherine mentioned, excuse me, that, well, maybe it was a counselor, but that part of that district is going away, and we actually are, there's only 2 or 3 parcels in next year's fiscal year that will be remaining to help fund debt service for the waterfront TIF district as that project continues. The rest of it will be released.
What is the time frame in which we will be completely clear of the TIF obligations altogether, meaning it will be paid off?
Oh, the TIF obligations. Well, I know that we can continue collecting increment for, I believe it's about the next 10 to 11 years for both districts. Depending on how it goes and how the grand list, how those numbers change, we could pay it off sooner. It just depends on how much increment we're collecting. Once we stop with the project costs, we won't be paying as much except for debt service. So right now I would say 10 to 11 years is the timeline that's on our models, our financial plans.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone in the room?
Mr. McCarthy.
Turn the microphone over to Dennis McCarthy.
Is that working? Thank you. So I was just into the property tax that I have been talking or emailing Joe Kane. And my property taxes have gone from 2019 to now from 5,000 to 11,000 a year. And he was saying that most of the increase is state increase on that for the educational end of it. I think you guys, from what I hear, are doing a great job, getting into the minutia of what's going on here. But I just wanted to say that I talk to a lot of people my age, and it's really impacted. So, do you have any comments on what we can do about the state?
I can talk a little bit about that too.
Sorry.
No, you should probably start.
Well, as you probably heard, and Joe's right. I think 67% of your property tax bill in Burlington, if you're paying by property tax, is going to the state ed fund. And in my estimation as a former, and this is my opinion, I guess I'm opinionating here, but I think it's a system that's fundamentally broken and has been for some time. And I know it's a priority of both the governor's administration and the legislature to address it. But what they've been doing for years is putting Band-Aids on provisions from 2003 and 1999, Act 16, Act 68. And the issue is we have too many school districts, too many buildings for too few students, with escalating costs for all the people that you need to run all those things. So hopefully this will get addressed. I don't think there's a quick fix for it. G might have some other ideas about it. It's going to take years for us to unwind this situation.
Yeah.
But we need to do it. And certainly that's where the work needs to be done. We don't have any leverage in the city because it's the education system is state run. And so we just are the tax collectors for that, other than the local decisions we can make about.
You feel the administration of that is too big?
The administration of which?
The school part of the taxing or the education department statewide?
Oh,
I'm not sure. I know that one thing I do want to put a plug in for is what a great job the school district did this year. They're actually having a reduction in the tax rate this year in Burlington.
Great.
So thanks. Thank you for that.
I actually feel like I have a lot of good news to share. One of the major things that school board representatives have been working on for a couple years now is having what is called the pupil weighted system basically be revamped and instituted with empirical evidence and data that allows Burlington to get get the money that they deserve to educate the children that we do. We for 20 years, Burlington was basically getting shortchanged. And when the state doesn't give a district enough money to educate their children is when they then go to their local residents and ask for more money via the school board asking the school budget.
So if we get enough money from the state, we don't have to ask residents for more. First of all, I want to back up a little bit that what you pay into the state ed fund is essentially based on the value of your house and the income or your income. The majority of people living in Burlington are eligible for, what is it called? Yeah. And I know that there is talk about extending that or like making that income level greater, you know, as in like more people will be eligible for that kickback. And the school budget is looking great. So much relief in sight, you guys, as far as that's concerned. But our hands are tied mostly with healthcare and benefits. And we are also at the bargaining table with unions. I don't know. There's a couple other things that are going on legislatively. I'm Jeannie. I'm Jeannie Waltz. I'm looking to serve on the school board again. I believe this is my third term. Will be my third term. Representing Central District. That's Ward 2 and 3. And oh God, what was I going to say about? There's so much stuff going on in this legislative session, and there's a ton of advocacy work to be done. But
Well, thank you for your work.
Please,
You know, I'm glad to see everybody's sort of aware of what
Yeah.
has to happen here.
Yes. Okay. So these weights are on the so you can imagine there's a lot of affluent districts that were not psyched to let go of their pocket change, right? Even though because they just don't. I don't know how to explain it, and I'm going to not be mean about it. Let's just say it's been hard for them, even though they've been given a 5-year plan to ease into this transition. It's really hard for me not to be condescending about it. It's like, get it together, guys. All right. But of course, these people are advocating for these weights to be changed because it's not funding their schools the way they're used to. They're used to more money, and they are a loud voice. So Burlington and other districts that are in need and are finally getting what is due them, they need to speak up. So this system is just, after years and years and years of work, is just being implemented, and they're already trying to kick it to the curb. It is basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of stuff because they believe the system is broken. It is, but guess what? This portion of it actually got fixed, and we need to see it play out a hell of a lot longer than a half a year before we decide that it's broken.
Thanks.
So your school board members are completely going to town advocating for that.
And I just wanted to note here that we're fortunate that prior to his service on the city councilor, Councilor Barlow did serve a term or two on the school board. So he does have some experience in that regard, as does yours truly. But also what Jeannie is not telling you is that the changes she spoke of regarding the weighted pupil funding average, it was a team effort, and she was an integral part of that team. And we would not have gotten there if not for her efforts and lobbying down in Montpelier to really make the case for Burlington and why and how we're different and why we needed to have a change to the formula. So I'm very grateful for that work as well. And I will probably be down at the State House at some point myself to have these conversations, because I think Councilor Barlow did a great job of characterizing what one of the many issues are. So anybody else have any questions? I do have a few of my own, but I'm going to yield them in case there's anyone else from the floor. We'll get us back on track. We are a little behind, so bear with us. I guess a couple quick ideas here. In terms of new revenue, we recently, the council, by way of the Department of Public Works, approved a increase in the parking rates in the downtown. And of course, the money from the parking fees remains within the Department of Public Works, pays for the traffic lights, the signage, the striping on the roads, and I think the crossing guards as that was. But my understanding is the fines from parking go into the general fund. And it occurred to me that the fine for parking in a handicap space is only $125. And as I understand it, there's a number of cities across New England which that fee is $250 or $300. And I would don't know that it would make a lot of difference, but I would definitely encourage the city to take a look at that, and not only as a way to raise revenue, but also as to discourage people from taking advantage of those spaces, which as a downtown resident, I see quite a bit, people parking in those spaces without the necessary placard. And then the other option would be, while we're on the parking, I think the city of Winooski does it, and I believe the state from municipalities in Pennsylvania, is to create a new offense for parking against the grain of traffic. So if the traffic is going this way and the person's parking this way, that could be a dangerous situation when the parked vehicle attempts to pull out back into the traffic and could lead to a head-on collision. So that's something there. I'm generally not a big fan of creating a bigger government, but this is something I think makes sense from a public safety point of view. So going to kind of make an exception there. And then the question that I wanted to get through, I have heard through the grapevine that the funding for the NPAs is going to be cut and that they're going to try to require the NPAs to only some of them are going to be funded. Can you speak to the funding for the NPAs or what's going on there?
I'm not aware of that. And I will say that in my current budget modeling, we have kept the NPA funding at, I can't tell you exactly what it was last year, but it is the same in FY26 as it is in FY25. So I'm not exactly sure where that rumor is coming from.
I haven't heard of that either.
Yeah.
What I had heard is that due to the limited funding, they were going to try to fund the district level NPAs and try to enforce some mergers. And I'm not sure how well that's going to go over if that's the case.
Okay.
I can't imagine.
We're the they and we haven't.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, we've talked about a lot of things
They is plural.
in terms of ideas, but I am happy to receive that feedback, and should that come up again, I will certainly let them know.
Yeah, I think we have 8 NPAs total, some which have the joint operations and some that do not. And I think each NPA is currently getting 3,000, which I believe was a $500 increase with fiscal 25, for which we're appreciative. So that would be what, about $24,000?
Yes.
Which
it's not a huge driver of our budget.
Would that be considered change from the couch too?
Yes.
Well, hopefully we can keep the change from the couch.
I'm in favor of that. I'll go on the record saying.
All right, thank you so much. Unless there's no further questions, we're going to turn it over to Ashley, a little bit behind schedule. But again, we do have the room here, and unless there's objections, we can run a little over if there are questions. I think it's important to have robust discussion, but I also realize people have commitments as well.
All right.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for having me.
And Shawnee, can you queue up? All right, awesome.
I do have a set of slides. I will try to go into them as much detail as we can, and then obviously I'll try to leave as much time as we can for questions also. Just wait for them to get pulled up. That's okay. While we're waiting though, one thing I can probably just jump into is I usually give an overview, refresher of what capital projects capital really is. And especially in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the city's general fund capital program. Yes, that's the right one. And you can move it to the third slide. The city defines a capital project as one that the city's funds wholly or in part, and it can involve construction, renovations. It often involves streets and sidewalks, fleets, parks, improvements to our buildings. What it does not fund is any item that would be categorized as a routine repair or maintenance. So usually an annual recurring item that should be captured in an operating budget. For the general fund capital side, we will be talking today about DPW, fleet, streets, sidewalks, transportation safety, our parks, our facilities, including this building here, our fire and police, public art, and one of the things that's not on here is our innovation and technology folks run the innards of our operations. I also just want to make it clear, so we are not going to talk about water, very separate from our budget, and that would also, just to clarify, BED and the airport also have their own separate capital program. All right, we can go to couple slides. So why are we talking about another bond now? So without additional funding, the city currently, I am projecting that our capital need across all of these different asset classes is about $8 to $10 million a year at least. And without this additional funding, the city by charter only provides the capital program with $2 million in annual borrowing. So this bonding ask would help us get closer to that $8 to $10 million a year target for our critical infrastructure needs. The other big piece of this is our implementation for these different pieces of infrastructure. Really, the cost of these things have not gone down in the last several years. It's only continued to increase, and we've seen that increase across non-construction and construction type costs. All right, we can go to the next one. The next few slides will go through, give you a high-level overview of the need that we see in our general fund capital. Our first one that I absolutely have to mention is our fleet program. This includes, all of our vehicles and equipment that the city uses. We own in total about 242 general fund fleet assets. And to date, 30% of these items need to be replaced. And 45% of that 30% include what we consider our public safety fleet and equipment. And this will be your fire trucks, your ambulances, cruisers for the police department, and even our snow removal vehicles like our snow plows and our sidewalk tractors. We deferred spending on our fleet in the last 2 fiscal years. And so this is a really important component of this bond ask. About $3 million is the current estimated need for our fleet to get us back onto a regular replacement schedule. Our sidewalks are up next as well. We have 133 miles of sidewalks in this city, and our Department of Public Works estimates that at least 3 miles should be replaced annually. And the current estimate for the cost of that replacement is about $1 million a year. So we have a long ways to go. We only funded out of the last bond. It was about 1.9, I think, or $1.5 million out of the last bond. So that obviously it didn't get us. It got us $1.5 million or 1.5 miles of sidewalks. And right now, the tech services team is estimating about 17.2 miles of current city infrastructure is in serious or poor condition. You can go to the next slide. Our streets are also on this list. So we own and maintain about 88 miles of streets, and the DPW Tech Services team estimates about 4 miles really should be replaced or paved annually to really keep our network of streets in good working order. This is actually a little bit more costly than a sidewalk replacement at $1.2 million a mile. And the Tech Services team estimates about 10.8 million or 10.8 miles of our current street network does not meet acceptable condition. So this would be another major part of this bond ask. Our transportation safety people are also, they're known as transportation planners in DPW. I've combined 2 infrastructure components in this presentation. I have our bridges and then also our transportation calming infrastructure. We have 3 bridges in our capital plan currently. The biggest one right now, which will be a large focus of this bond, is the Winooski Bridge project, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, but it is in dire need of replacement. And the city is in partnership with VTrans and the city of Winooski, and we have a local match responsibility. It's about $4 million remaining on our local match needs for this project, which I would like to take out of this bond allocation if voters approve it. In addition, the transportation calming group, we have the group has estimated if we can receive at least $300,000 a year to go towards our traffic calming transportation planning program, we can get about 14 new transportation calming temporary or permanent pieces of infrastructure implemented each year. And if we were able to do that, that would actually hit about 75% of our current community requests, which is at about 56 at this point in time. So that would really be a huge hit for that program. Next slide. And last but not least, we have our city buildings and our parks. Our city buildings, we have a lot of need in our city buildings. The city owns 19 buildings. We have at least $700,000 of deferred need in each building. We have been doing a lot of work in our city hall building. Our fire station has needed significant repairs, Fire Station 1 in particular. We know of a lot of need over at 1 North Ave, our police department. So this bond would really go a long way to knocking out some badly needed and overdue improvements to many city buildings throughout the city. One example of a really exciting project that we're doing now with money that we received in this bond is over at the Miller Center, where hopefully this year we're going to be looking to start a project to turn the Miller Center's whole HVAC system into a net zero type energy efficient system. That building badly needs replacement of its HVAC. So these are the kinds of things that our facilities team was working on and would like to do with additional funding from this bond. Our parks, the city has 37 parks and again has about $700,000 in deferred need per park. And so this bond would go a long way towards helping us continue improvements at Callahan Park, at Perkins Pier. There's a lot of deferred need in our Harbor Marina and Perkins. So this is, again, really important funding for our parks team, who right now they receive their capital. They really only receive additional capital in their pennies for parks dedicated tax. And so this would really help provide additional support for them to leverage more funds to do more work. All right, next slide. This next slide is a new slide that I added over the last few days. We wanted to start showing a draft allocation of how we could use this $20 million. It shows you different ranges per capital assets. This is not guaranteed. And obviously the capital budget is constantly evolving depending on what critical emergent need pops up next, or something that changes. Priorities change all the time, so we're always constantly trying to be nimble and leverage funds when we can. If something comes up that we can get a grant for, we might take that over something else. So this is just a high level projection of how we could use money, and it also shows you, what you could get with various levels of funding per asset. All right, next one. I'm really excited about this slide because this is very new for the city. I am very excited about it. I had a lot of support. We have really great folks here at the city. But this is we're calling it the capital planning map, which is showing you, if you go and check it out, it'll show you the next 5 to 6 years of capital needs across the city. And for all of the assets that we've talked about tonight, there are no funding guarantees for anything on this map, but it at least will become a planning tool for us. I'm hoping to overlay it with all kinds of different types of data, including community feedback that we get from you guys. You can go onto this map and take a community survey, which we will collect data on, which we can then create a layer that will overlay everything else on this map. So we can start prioritizing, finding overlaps where we can get the most bang for our buck on our projects. And so I really hope you guys take the time to take the survey. I intend for this map to live forever if possible, and the survey will just continue to run because feedback will change, the needs of the city will change. And so I think this survey will be a really important tool.
And the map is really cool. I've seen it at the presentation. It's interactive, and you can definitely check out. It's got a lot of great stuff in it. And sure, it took a lot of work on the part of the city to put that together, and like to recognize the folks in the IT and the planning departments that have worked on that. It's a big lift to do that to just aggregate all the data and then visualize it.
Yes. Thank you.
Speaking as an IT professional.
No, I am indebted to Warren and Nancy for forever, probably. So yes. But then you'll also see the other criteria that we currently prioritize our capital projects from: accessibility, affordability, efficiency, equity, sustainability, and safety. So somehow I'd like to try to incorporate different layers of data in covering those categories to also overlay on this map eventually. So we have some ways to go, but I think it's a really cool map. It's really interactive, and I hope you check it out and let me know if you have feedback too. We will take feedback. What can we make better, or what can we change? All right. We're getting near the end. You can go to the next 2 slides. Yeah. So to wrap up, this presentation tonight, we are, I think this has been said a lot, but we are clearly and more very obviously focused on affordability and transparency with this ask, as with all of the asks that are coming in front of residents this year. It is really important for us to make sure that we're properly balancing the investment of any resources that we have with those that are most critical to our operations. That's truly a focus for this general fund capital bond ask. We're focused on our critical needs to make sure that we can continue to provide the services that our residents expect. And that's what this bond will help us do. You heard the latest budget update. So really, we're working with all the operating budget planners and preparers to make sure that all of our efficiencies are aligning, that we're thinking of our operations and maintenance budgets for all of our assets, which is really important in terms of taking future burden off of any capital bond or any future capital resources. So down the road, I think this will really help us maximize all of our capital revenues that we could ever bring in. And depending on what we're able to do, like I mentioned before, we continue to want to try to leverage any money that we receive with federal and state funding opportunities. One of the really cool things that we noticed in looking at the data from the last bond is we were able to leverage with $5 million of bond money, it was over almost $8 million of grants of federal aid. And so we have a similar goal projecting down the road. And of course, the big tagline is we don't want to wait because it's not going to help us improve our situation. Doing things now will benefit in the long run and save us money. Next slide, please. And this is just a graph that is aiming to show us, how the city reviews its debt capacity over time. So that, what you're seeing here is the amount of debt that the city and the school has. We have to follow our debt policy in order to make any kind of bond ask. And so in reviewing that this year, we saw that due to growth in the grand list and the payments that we made to reduce our debt service helped create a gap of a little more than $20 million so that we could feel comfortable coming to voters this year asking for additional support for the general fund capital program. Next slide. I threw another table on this slide because I want to just remind everybody about our spend out, because part of how we plan to utilize this 20 million. It won't be all at once. We really want to spend this money out over the next 3 years. So the immediate impact on a tax bill is not, it's going to be spread out over time, and the maximum impact will be about $12 a month on a $500,000 home. And potentially, again, as we're paying off our debt service, it could be less than that over time. All right. Next slide. And this is my next step slide. So it's really my last one. And it's not updated, but it's fine. We're going to continue to talk with more NPAs. Next week we, I think, are going to 2 of them. But feel free to continue to reach out to me. We have a really great BTV Thrives is what we're calling it website, where we're talking about all of the bond asks, including the water resources asks. All of the links for all of the things are there, but if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me. I would be happy to try to answer them and point you in a direction to get some answers. So with that, I am happy to take questions.
Thank you. Question for the survey real quick. What's what's the dates for it being open?
I'm not closing it, so you could take it. Yes. Yeah.
Infrastructure pieces of are the actual are they band-aids or the actual replacement, like upgrades or retrofits, whatever term you want to use? Are they band-aids or are they actual fixes?
Everything in my plan now is an actual fix. We don't have time to do any more band-aids. So everything on this list right now that is in my projections are critical infrastructure needs that we expect to not continue to cause us issues down the road.
Okay, so like the HVAC, sometimes they last like 1 or 2 decades.
Right. HVAC?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So 1-2 decades, this one should be okay for the net zero as you plan for.
Yes. So the Miller Center's current system is an RTU system, rooftop units.
Yeah.
Those are incredibly old, and they're getting to a point where they're reaching critical. They need to come off. They need to be replaced with something else before we run into other issues with our building there. So we are working to replace the units with a more energy efficient system that will serve us much longer and also get us energy cost savings and rebates and that kind of thing. So that, for example, we're doing two things really with one project. We're replacing a horribly out of date and failing system with a better one that's energy efficient.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you think you could explain the tax bill and briefly, or do we need to have a separate presentation for that?
We should probably have a separate conversation.
Let's plan for that in the
Yes,
future. All
I would
right.
love it.
So without further ado, we'll do our best to get back on track, and we'll turn the microphone over to Megan from Department of Public Works, who will talk to us about the water resources bond. Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into Megan's presentation, though, I did see we have a couple folks online. If there's any questions from y'all online, just use the raise hand function at some point and we'll loop back to you on there. I just wanted to reach out and acknowledge y'all are attending tonight.
Hi all. Thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. My name is Megan Moyer. I'm the Division Director for Water Resources. It's a division of the Department of Public Works. So my boss is Chapin Spencer. And we've got a couple slides here for you today just to make sure you're oriented. I don't know how much, I think you came to the
I came
to town hall.
Yeah, it was a great presentation. It was very detailed.
So we'll touch upon some of that. Just to make sure everybody has all the information, because that's the most important part, right? And then deciding to vote, however you choose to vote. So let me get this going. There we go.
And we do have a little flexibility on the schedule. We have the room actually till 9 o'clock. So
Okay. Well, I don't think we'll stay that long, although I could talk about this stuff until even past then.
thank you, Chief Jansen, CEO Shad, and Ashley.
Thank you. So you're going to get the full, it's the condensed full version, right? Because we did tours, I think in November, December, where we kind of laid out the need. And then as the details have developed, we've given some other presentations. So I've kind of tried to squish it into one presentation. So before we talk about the additional work that we need to do, I wanted to talk to you about the work we already accomplished with the $30 million bond that was passed in 2018. And also the 2016 water bond that was passed in 2016. So that was about $8.3 million. And with that money, we've entirely focused on our drinking water main system. You can see that's what a typical old main looks like. It's, for lack of a better term, it's called tuberculation, which is a really cool word, but it's rust buildup inside the pipe. So it can over time constrict the flow. If we have major changes in velocity, like when we do hydrant flushing, some of which is to prevent more of this from forming, you may see discolored water, right? It's from the rust essentially in that. It's safe to drink, but nobody likes to drink it. Even my own kids, when it happened, were like, oh, I'm not drinking that. And of course, we had a conversation about the fact that tap water is best. But
It's
anyhow,
called tuberculation.
tuberculation is the stuff that forms on the inside. And what's cool is, in some places we are just go ahead and wholesale replacing the water main. It kind of depends on where we are as to whether it makes sense. It used to be a lot cheaper to do what we call relining, which is the bottom picture, which is this really cool process where they go through, they clean out all the tuberculation, and then they basically put a whole new pipe that cures on the inside of the old pipe. You don't get as much life from it, but you're still expected to get 50, 60 years out of it. So it's good investment.
And you don't have to dig.
You don't have to dig. And particularly in places where there's ledge or a lot of utilities, it's better to come through and do the relining. But we are seeing, because of the costs of the liner have changed over time, the cost per linear foot has started to change. It used to be like a no-brainer to do all relining, and now it's a little bit of a case-by-case choice. On the clean water side, so this was the 2018 bond that was passed after we had some failures in 2018, and we had over 13 million gallons of untreated or partially treated sewage that went to the lake, which is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. We got this initial nugget of money. Staff at the time, I'm just going to be honest, because I know Tiki in particular had this question. We believe that 30 million was going to get us much further. That $30 million number was based on a previous report before I took over, where they were doing the best that they could, and their scope of work wasn't necessarily to develop a comprehensive plan. It was to kind of just go case by case. If I replace this pump with the exact same pump, what would it cost? Those are the numbers we had to prepare a bond vote, and I think it was like 6 weeks. Not a very fun time. We're really proud though of the money that we got and what we've done. We fixed the things that broke, the disinfection systems and the computerized controls. And then the balance of the wastewater side money is actually going to be, it's going into construction this year. It took us time to get it designed, but it's the headworks upgrade. So it's has anybody taken a tour of the treatment plant yet? Not yet is the answer, right?
Yeah, not yet.
So it's the first part of the treatment system. It's the sieve or the spaghetti colander, if you will, that keeps all of the things that come down our pipes, bricks, 2x4s, underwear, cell phones,
Fishing poles.
all of the things you can imagine and more. I have a slide that I should include. I include it in like my talk for third graders because they find it very fascinating to see all the things that have come down. But anyhow, it's a very important piece of the puzzle because it protects all of the downstream equipment. So before we spend the additional millions to replace everything, doing those parts, no matter what direction we go, is sort of like the first step. And so we're going to be spending about 18 million on that. The balance of the money has gone to a variety of projects, including stormwater, other pipe projects on the wastewater and stormwater side, repairing an outfall. We've invested money in reducing stormwater to the combined sewer system. We've upgraded 2 satellite pump stations, and I think that's it. But the good news is because of grants and also subsidies that we've gotten, we've actually been able to invest more than the $30 million authorization. So we've, similar to what Ashley was saying, a lot of times these bonding authorization gives us that local match money, right? And it shows the community's interested in the project, and then that can help you draw in other funds. So on the clean water side, which is what we call wastewater and stormwater, similarly, we've relined a whole bunch of mains. You can't see the number. It's about 8.6 miles. We've replaced those systems that failed. We've installed rain gardens and bioretention to soak up water instead of letting it to go to the combined sewer system. And because of the money that we've invested, particularly in the wastewater treatment plants, we kind of did this semi-simple exercise. We've graded, like a simple letter grade, the systems in our wastewater treatment system. And this is what the scores looked like prior to 2018. You can see there's a whole bunch of stuff in the F, D, and C category. The good news is that there's now more things in the A category, but unfortunately we still have things in that C, D, and F category. And that's really what this next phase is about, is keep shifting us to get it. Maybe we'll never be all in the A, but at least we should be in the B. Okay. So why now? Why are we coming to you now? Not a couple of years from now. We know there's so much stuff going on. But basically, we need these investments in order to continue to provide reliable and sustainable services, not just to the Burlington of now, but the future Burlington. The systems we're talking about are at significant risk of failure. When they fail, sometimes it can be a permit violation that just goes on a report, but when it's a violation or a failure that results in the discharge of bacteria, that's an immediate posting on the state website. We call it the wall of shame because we do not like to be on it, and we take our jobs very seriously. And it results in beach closures within a 1 mile area. As you all know, that can could result in fines, but more than fines, what I'm worried about is just the public perception of Burlington, right? Our economy is around the lake. We need to show people that we're protecting the lake. The other thing that's changed in the last 2 to 3 years is the housing conversation, right? I think we all knew it was happening, but it seems like it's really moving. We're seeing zoning change. We're seeing that things that couldn't have been built in Burlington before, the density could now be built. Regardless of how you feel about it, it has been passed, and more density means more toilets, more wastewater. And when I start to look at where we could be with our flows, we start to approach the place on our permits where the state would be basically sending us a letter and saying, you got to build a bigger plant. So this plan involves giving ourselves additional capacity at main plant. Also, and another piece is combining, I think I'll get to it later, one of our smaller plants with main plant, so we can kind of be more efficient over the long term and save ratepayers future costs by doing this consolidation now. Climate change is always a challenge. And then, we have the safety and code upgrades. The plant has not been upgraded since the 1990s. A lot of stuff has changed. I have workers, amazing workers, who show up every day and stuff is breaking. It's their job to produce clean, safe water that goes to the lake. They take it very seriously. And when they don't have the right tools because stuff is breaking, that starts to wear on a person when you show up every day. The other side is our lake. By protecting and making our existing systems, which work really, really well, more resilient, that means we're preventing beach closures. There's some beach closures I can't prevent, the ones that are due to climate change and blue-green algae that's coming from all of Vermont, or the phosphorus that's coming from all of Vermont. But a piece of equipment, if it works, it's going to do its job, and that means you can prevent these beach closures. Burlington, many communities have additional phosphorus reduction obligations. Burlington has some pretty big ones because we have big wastewater treatment plants. The state decided to kind of pick on the big ones and make them do more than some other communities. And so we have to really reduce our phosphorus discharges. And we are planning on doing that with this plan by installing what's called tertiary treatment. It's a third layer of phosphorus removal that we don't currently have, even though our plants already remove about 92% of the phosphorus that comes to us in the sewage, but we got to do better. And that's what we're planning on doing. And then our legacy or our challenges with dealing with the legacy of our combined sewer system are not ever really going to go away. We just keep chipping away at them, and we're planning on doing that with this project as well. So specifically on the wastewater treatment plant process or improvements project, mentioned these are the 3 wastewater treatment plants we have. You all drain to main plant. There is the small plant on Riverside. I used to say you'd smell donuts, then barbecue, and then something else, and that was us. We don't have the donuts there anymore, but we have the barbecue. And then the North plant, which is at the very end of North Ave. Crazily, like wastewater treatment only came to Burlington in the 1950s on the waterfront. So we were just pooping in the water bodies all up until 1950s. So if you were here before that and you swam, you probably were swimming in sewage. Also crazy that it then still took until the 1960s for us to install plants on the Winooski, right? So up until that point, guess where it was going? You then see, a fairly regular cycle with the Clean Water Act in 1970, which came with a whole bunch of money. They upgraded the pollutant treatment, right? Because people knew more and more about, we just got to take care of these point sources. And then again in 1994, that was the last big upgrade where we upgraded our nutrient removal. And the biggest thing was that we put in a wet weather treatment system. So we used to have over 170 million gallons of combined sewer overflow going into the harbor. I think in our worst year recently, maybe it's been 1 million, and people forget where we've come from and that we are now, with regard to the combined sewer overflow, we're grabbing the top of the tree. Like we have gotten all the low hanging fruit, and that was what we did in the 1990s. 5 main goals with our wastewater treatment plant improvement project: the resiliency piece we already talked about, the environmental piece, making sure we're meeting or exceeding the requirements from the state around phosphorus, increasing the capacity at main plant, improving worker safety, and odors. Nobody likes how the wastewater treatment plant smells when you're on the bike path. We know that. There's some things we can do. There's a first round of things that we're going to do with this plan, and we're actually going to monitor to the best of our abilities. There's actually devices like sniffers. I think I'll have to get a picture of them. I think they actually have like a giant cone thing that takes in the air. But we're going to monitor the odors pre and post project and see how much we've been able to reduce it. And then there may be additional investments we'll want to make if it's not substantially improved. So that was the sort of crux project on the lake bond side, the 152 million that we are seeking to get on the ballot. On the drinking water side, which is about 20 million, the biggest part of that is the reservoir improvements project. And for those of you who may or may not know, I don't know do you recognize the little cute building?
So cute.
Yes. It's not going away. It's a historic landmark. Even though we're going to build a new one, we're going to have to mothball it and keep it there. I joke about maybe we should Airbnb it. Maybe people would like to spend lots of money to stay there, but that's a different question. So that pump house, that pump station is right there on the corner, and it's adjacent to two reservoirs that were built in the 1800s and is about 7 million gallons of water storage. The reservoirs themselves are really important to the entire city. They provide about 24 hours worth of emergency storage. So if I think it's actually next week, we have to shut the drinking water plant down for a 5 to 6 hour time period so we can swap out some equipment. And during that time period, because we're not bringing in water and sending it out, everybody's drawing off of that reservoir. But the clock is ticking. If something doesn't go right, we have 24 hours to figure it out, which is, a challenge. I have not been in that situation yet, and hopefully won't have to. But so the reservoir itself, which the project will be re-roofing it, doing some structural upgrades, and in particular, improving the not so great looking retaining wall that is on the Main Street side that sort of just needs a lot of sprucing up and kind of looks like it's moving a little bit. The big part of the project is to build the new pump station. And the pump station is extremely important to this blue area. We call it the high service in the city. Everybody else is on what we call the low service, being that it's fed directly from either the pumps that are at the lake or the reservoir, whereas the high service is fed with the pressures that are achieved by pumping water up to the two elevated tanks. There's the big tank on UVM campus, and then there's a littler tank that I call Sputnik because it has all the antenna on it on the Redstone campus. And that's what's responsible for everybody on the high services water pressure, including our friends, the hospital. A hospital without water is not a great hospital. And so it's a resiliency project for everybody, but obviously that's one of my major customers that I will not let run out of water. Unfortunately, when we do the grading system at that facility, a lot of Fs, Ds, and Cs. It's a picture of the basement on the left, and then this is one of the cracks that we've been monitoring as it continues to spread. We're about to do some other work with some lolly columns. It's an old house, right? If anybody lives in a old house, what you do, things shift, they move, and you have to start intervening. And unfortunately, the floor of this reservoir holds very, very, very heavy, very, very, very important pumps. So we cannot let it come crashing down, because then I have no way to get water to the hospital and the rest of that blue area. So if you've been following the news, the number that I originally presented was a bigger number, right? Staff's preference would be to be going after these parts. So you see the stage 1 and stage 2 in the yellow outline. That's what made up the original number that was in the 204 range, right? Really big number. And also the number that was associated, and the phasing that was associated with the higher rate increases that we previously presented. What we've done based on community feedback, based on the council feedback, and also I think some good strategy, because initially I was like, no, we need to do this all because this is what the system needs. But what we kind of came to is that we think there's a good chance, and I've been talking about it, that we could be eligible for grant funding for the main wastewater treatment plant project. It hits all of the marks in the priority schemes that the state has. And so the benefit of doing it this way is that I could go to the voters, if we're successful getting on the ballot, for this really big number, but then ultimately end up with a smaller cost project because of grants, right? And I guess there is some worry that if we ask for too big of a number, right, people might not support it. So by coming in for the stuff that I know that we're going to need at least that 152 million. And then what I'm hoping is if we get grant funding towards some of stage 1, then that means when I come back as early as 2027, and I want to be clear, we're not able to push these off for 5-10 more years. Like, I'm going to be coming back pretty quickly. Hopefully that number that I present in that year is going to be smaller, right? And it's going to be tighter because we're going to know a lot more. And so from that perspective, staff have grown comfortable with the approach that we're taking now, which has some benefits. The thing that I can't tell you about exactly though is the drinking water plant. It hasn't been upgraded since 1984. The current drinking water bond has a couple of million to address some things we know we have to take care of. But like the wastewater, the fact that we don't want to use a number that's not fully baked, we're doing a full comprehensive assessment of the drinking water plant, which will include evaluating whether or not there's a strong chance of additional changing regulations. It will be taking a look at the fact that our source water, the lake, while it's still extremely clean, it does have more turbidity, more cloudiness and sediment in it because of all of the floods that we've had. And that has an impact on how easy it is for us to treat the water. So we're still able to meet all of our requirements, but we're seeing pressures that we would like to not see and we may want to prepare ourselves differently for. So with all of the phasing that we've done, the numbers that we've come to are a bit smaller. The drinking water one, I think, was 21 million. We brought it down to 20. And then the major difference in the lake bond or the clean water number for wastewater and stormwater is that downward shift on the wastewater plant number for now. I'm trying to be really transparent with the public about what's in, what's out. And I'm providing all of the numbers to the best of my ability of the other things that could be coming. When and where I know they have to happen. So that east plant consolidation and the north plant, like those are non-negotiables. If you're supporting and you understand what stage 1 is, you are also understanding that stage 2 still has to happen. I've included those pieces in the rate model that I'm going to show you, because I think it would be disingenuous for me to show you a happy, shiny, oh, your rate increases aren't going to be that bad. And then 2 years from now, I come back and all of a sudden, the other piece is because of the way the borrowing happens, and in order to not just have one ginormous giant rate increase, we're trying to phase them in to the best of our abilities. And so we kind of have to start that process now, even if that borrowing isn't going to happen for a little bit later. Otherwise, it becomes really hard to catch up. So the rate increases, still very steep curve, steeper than I would like to be presenting to you all. But the overall percent increase, and this is over a 5-year time period, is about 89% instead of the 107 or 113 that we originally were playing around with. A lot can change, but this is intended to be conservative, right? Things can change to scenario and able to lock in whether there's grant funding. As I get from City Place and Cambrian Rise as to fully occupied, maybe some things in the model I can change that are going to help this outlook. The other thing that we're really pushing on is provides or has some availability interest revolving fund loans. I'm a part of our borrowing plan based on my conversations with the state, and I shortfall over all of those funds. So to put too much down, putting all of our projects borrowing from the state instead of bonds, which are to bring this or 80%. Some things that I think before we even get to bond will the overall rating. I'm just talk really fast. Because I'm from Texas originally, so I don't know.
5-year period.
Yeah, 89% over. You're looking at plan 10 year 19, and then it comes down to 12, 13 period, and then we had increases of 5 that 1990 have this much of a not this but
raise rents 50 to 70.
Apologies. That's okay. When 2018, when we went to on ballot and start to address the affordability, and like we really value this. We that any household can regularly and on time to meet other essential needs. Somebody, and I think there are rate pressures, right, who are having to make choices between feeding their kids good food and being able to pay the water bill and not get behind. That's not okay. That's an essential service. So we have to figure out how to help the people who are going to be having a hard time. So because of what the council's commitment, we passed what I believe is Vermont's first affordability program. On the side, there's a lot of affordability programs in gas and electric and whatnot, but we did it for water. And in particular, for people who already qualify for state and federal programs, they're able to demonstrate that they qualify for those programs, and we use that as a surrogate because we don't have the resources to do income verification. This is just a start because, there's that benefits cliff, right? The next turn of the wheel, I don't know if we're going to help that tranche of people more, or if we're going to try to tackle the next people who are getting any of the benefits of those other programs, right? And maybe feeling the impact of this more. Like, we really want our program to be as equitable as possible. But we're trying to crack the nut of how we do income verification. We're engaged with the administration's process on the fair taxation committee, because I think there's a lot of how they set their benchmarks. But basically, we don't have all the answers right now. I want to address your renter question. Helping renter has been an issue across the country because renters don't usually pay their water sewer bill directly. It ends up impacting their rents. What Seattle Public Utilities did and what we're exploring with BED, ability to give people a credit that comes from the water system on their electric bill. So we would figure out how much money to give to BED, and then BED would a customer who qualified for the program further discount their electric bill with the thought of, like, utilities are utilities. it's still going to help your bottom line, but you know that there's going to be this upward pressure on the rents. So I don't know if that's going to happen for this next fiscal year, but it's one concrete idea we have about how we could help at least the rental population, because we know it's a big part of the city.
When you're ready to take questions or suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys can read this. This is just it's not advancing. My slide advanced, but I guess Zoom is
Yeah, and Counselor Grant got bumped and she just texted she's trying to get back in.
you have this in your where I sent
I'm the
it.
civic
Yep.
clerk on the.
So the next
Yeah.
slide was just all of the things that we're trying to do to just bring down the bill impact, like affordability. Yeah, pursuing grants, the availability of SRF funding. We've been talking to anybody we can at the state about our projects, and in particular the nexus of our projects with housing. If the state is going to talk about really meeting housing goals, and they're talking about giving funding for housing, they need to be addressing this water sewer component. Otherwise, communities, right, where a lot of the housing could be occurring, aren't going to be able to take it on. And with that, it's going to catch up in just a second. I just have a summary slide about the ask. We're going back to the council January 27th to request that they place a $20 million water bond and a $152 million lake bond on the ballot. Or who it is that's getting it. And so I don't know.
Well, I just want to say the people that live in CHT houses, shared equity, it's like 25% equity. But we are bound by whatever agreement to for enter in personal information.
It's done like information for a little checkbox or an opt out. If you do the opt able people. Right?
There are forms that we here for CHT as it is. Have a mortgage, our taxes. There's more opportunities to
like it. It's a lot for us to set up our own.
It's giving taxpayer dollars. I know wheels in minister that.
Yeah. By sharing. And so what if the state's okay, well, next year's form, put a checkbox on, and then you can give us, right? Box.
One of those times where we're
I mean, I hate to say it, but like, that could be a part of the deal when you.
Yep.
And it's to a home, so I don't.
I don't know if anybody's gonna. We offer these gets this to help people that so everybody else's rates would go up slightly. I think generally speaking, when it's a we need to help, but I want exactly we're helping and why.
Accidentally.
Okay.
That is.
All right. We're a little.
Was just gonna ask the program mentioned with BED, that's something he mentions, yeah, historically done it. If 10 years, I've had every situation under the sun and one for water or do pay for water as one of their utilities. Available.
We already have come qualified or in a rental. There's just the 1 meter. So I actually the water bill. Do you actually receive the water? If the potential for living in your would help you situation. Electric, every separate apartment gets a meter, and that's why we know renters are being increased the money. DC, we're going to go this direction. They did something where they has to enroll in the program. They're rely on compliance to see if it's working. So if I can get money here, maybe we significant part.
Questions and figure it out too.
So, it's just a. Yes.
So
That's hard, sorry.
it's not so much the amount fall.
Right. And
Get dropping versus I
Hi, can you hear me? I cannot hear or see. Oh, here we go.
I added a couple of things, but I realized that you hadn't gotten like what we'd already done, but there's also on the presentation is our website. So we have a lot of material. You could get lost in there.
I will say in my final comment, at least I hope, is that the city of Albany has a former pump station, which is now a brewery. So maybe some opportunity there. And on that note, I'd like to promote Councillor Grant, who has been very patiently waiting for us. Hi, Councillor Grant. Can we get Councillor Grant on the big screen?
For a tour tomorrow, I believe. So
Got room on the
I think we're doing tight counselor ones, but
okay.
Yes.
Good deal.
But I'm excited that she's going to be coming. Dress warmly. It gets cold on the waterfront.
Thank you. I will be pulling out my heavy sweaters.
Can we get Councillor Grant on the full screen perhaps, or? Yeah, do apologize for the technical difficulties that happens on occasion, but Shawnee's been really good about getting them resolved in a quick manner, so.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not in person tonight. I've been participating in our police department's community academy. This was something that Sarah Tim, when she had visited us a couple of months ago, she bought flyers about it. It's something that I've wanted to do for a while, since back when I was a police commissioner. Too many long days so far this week. And so this is the year that I'm participating, and it just happens to be on Wednesday nights through the second week of February. A few things I wanted to talk about. First of all, in Front Porch Forum today, there was a reminder about a forum on cat licensing, roaming, and regulations. It's regarding a new ordinance. It's going to be happening on Thursday, the 23rd, which is next Thursday at 5:30 in Contoy's Auditorium. Why should you care about this? There are many people in our city that allow their cats to quote unquote roam. That is, they're out during the day, maybe the evening, and they come back home and they hang out, and then they're out and they do that. This ordinance would prevent that. It would put in a regulation that you have to leash your cat. So just spread the word. This is going to affect a lot of people. And I'm not sure why the ordinance came out on like this. We've allowed cats to roam for
Can you kindly repeat the date there, Councilor Grant? I think you said it's Thursday, tomorrow?
Next Thursday, the 23rd. Next
And
Thursday.
is this like a hearing for a proposed ordinance, or has this ordinance already been adopted?
This is a hearing. So this is a hearing. Front Porch Forum has the link, but they're not saying what's in the ordinance. You have to like read to see what they're proposing. So people really need to turn out and say, hey, I'm not leashing my cat. I don't want to leash my cat. I don't think I should have to leash my cat. Because if people don't show up and be really loud about this, this will probably go through because the progs, we don't have the votes to stop that part of it.
We bring our cats too, so that they have representation.
I think that would be awesome.
Yeah,
I don't know the rules about
It
cats.
just sounds like this is a problem in search of, or a solution in search of a problem here. I'm curious, can you give a little background on what prompted this? I do know that there was a committee for the dog licensing, and my recollection is this may have come out of that, but it just seems like this is like unnecessary government overreach for a problem that really doesn't exist.
Right. So I can't follow. There's like certain things that I follow. This was not one of them, to be honest, but when it got to the state of where, okay, we're having hearings for it, And I read it, and then I reached out to Counselor Bergman and I said, am I correct in what I'm reading, that they want people to leash their cats and cats can't just be roaming anymore? Because certainly in the Old North End and then parts of downtown, like we just said, people do this. They do this a lot. So he said that was correct. Counselor Bergman was the one to push the community forum on it, have to have a separate public hearing on it. So spread the word. People really need to show up for it. And I'm going to try and find out more information as to why they're doing this. But Counselor Bergman did not support it, but he was outvoted 2-1 on
The
that.
sponsors of this proposed legislation, which counselors, so that we can follow up accordingly?
If it's coming out of ordinance, I think that would have been Shannon and McKnight, but I will verify that. There's some things coming out of ordinance I don't like. We had a big argument, maybe not a big argument. I have to admit, you know how I get sometimes, people. I get really loud and upset about things. I'm really upset about a proposal that would prevent emergency shelters from being in residential low and residential medium areas. We in the Central District are already doing our share. We have a lot of services. We have a lot of shelters. We're getting the new shelter just opening on Pearl Street. We're going to have the OPC. So to say that shelters can't be any place else in the city is just ridiculous. The meeting was ridiculous because we have to look for a compromise, and the compromise would be that we would allow shelters and RM and RL in areas that are part of the that have access to transportation. It's very troubling. It's NIMBYism at its most extreme. So there'll be more to come on that, and I plan on being continuing to be very vocal on that because I think, quite frankly, it's a little bit shameful. The next Public Safety Committee meeting is next Thursday, the 23rd. So if you are not protesting the issue with leashing cats, we welcome you to tune into that. That will be a remote meeting, and that will also be available to people to watch afterwards. Just keep your eye on Front Porch Forum because I periodically send out, at least once a month, I try to send out the links to the most recent two. Grant Street, we have a really bad issue. It's a big hot spot. We have a building there that is moving significant weight with regards to the drug crisis that has been reported to the mayor's office. I have requested that that be considered a hot spot. Center Street, we know, is a hot spot, and I'm requesting an update on the steps that are being taken there. Center Street and then the gas station right there have been very, very problematic. Apologize, people are getting out of the academy right now in the background. The town meeting day bonds, that was the subject of several presentations you had tonight. I really appreciate the fact that the city is being really proactive and transparent and trying, in addition to coming to the NPAs, there have been numerous presentations at the city council, so people really understand these projects and how important they are right now in the city. Former mayors of all political parties have been guilty of deferred maintenance, and now the proverbial chickens have come home to roost. And you saw some of the pictures about the situation at the water plant, and I will be doing a tour tomorrow morning with Councilor Barlow. The other things are, people frequently ask, what are the number of housing units that are actually in queue? And I'm like, that's a good thing to know. We're aware of certain projects that are getting their way, that are moving along, like the pit. But then we have the project, the YMCA building. What's the status of that? So I've got a couple of questions out to Charles Dillard and hopefully I'll have a document that's going to kind of say, hey, this has gone through the approval process, is actively in place. This is what's going through, and these are things that will be coming up, just so we know like how many units are happening. And the YMCA, questions about that have been coming up a lot because it's been a symbol of blight between Memorial and the YMCA. That little area is just continues to be like a hub for graffiti and also for people trying to get into those buildings as well. I've been talking a lot and want to be talking more about how we can promote our businesses in downtown Burlington. We are now in a season after the fourth quarter where traditionally we don't see traffic. What can we do to pull people into Burlington, including Burlingtonians? There are a lot of people outside coming to the coffee shops and getting meals, don't particularly feel that downtown is for them, and they live right in our city. So going to be trying to just kind of think out the box and push some questions in the community. So more to come on that. I am running for re-election, and I have 12 and 13-hour days, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that. I'll be door knocking on the weekends, but I've decided that I will be setting up this weekend and putting on Front Porch Forum a whole series of Zoom meetings. I'm going to do them in the morning, I'm going to do some in the evening, and some on the weekends as a way to allow people to conveniently come in remote, and also some of the local coffee shops. I'll be doing some meet and greets, and if anyone wants to host in their house, that will be great. The first time I ran, it was hard with a full-time job and still having my duties as a police commissioner, but now it's like I have my full-time job and I'm also a city councilor, so it's a little crazy. So I hope people are willing to support me. And if you're not, please send me an email to let me know why, because those type of emails are very important to me. And as long as people aren't being abusive, I read them and do my best to respond to them. Trying to think of a thing else. Oh, I'm encouraging people, if you haven't emailed Governor Scott, I think we all need to continue to email Governor Scott about our situation here with regards to the finances and the money that we need to deal with our issues, especially around individuals in our community who are unhoused. We really need the state we need the governor to work with the legislature, and they need to come up with a plan, because we can't keep shouldering this expense. We need other municipalities to open more shelters, and we need funds to be able to open more shelters. We need them to reconsider the how they look at opening emergency housing under adverse weather conditions. Right now, their temperature is -20, and we know that's completely unrealistic. Temperatures don't have to be that cold to be dangerous. And that is all I have. If anyone has any questions.
I just want to say thanks for bringing up the hearing related to the ordinance regulating the freedom of cats. That's something I was not really aware of, and little kind of surprised that that's coming down the pike. Clearly, we've got serious issues here in the city. We've got a number of people of unhoused. We have an opioid crisis, and yet we have folks who think it's important. Roaming cats, it's an important issue, apparently. Let's put our resources there while we have people out on the street freezing at night. But hey.
Yeah. I get really concerned about the disconnect right now. I feel like we're living on two different planets sometimes, and we're having these conversations. I'm deeply concerned about the escalated level of partisanship. I'm concerned about how the mayor is trying to move things forward, and it is really, really difficult. So yeah, leashing cats. Hey, Cindy. Parks director here. Ward 3 NPA meeting. Tell me about leashing cats.
Leashing?
Yeah, the ordinance to leash cats, the roaming.
Okay, so that came out of the dog task force.
Dog task force.
There was a
All
section
day.
in the dog task force that had about licensing cats. For them to look into licensing. And so the dog task force, while looking at that, part of their research showed about the harms that cats produce to wildlife when they're out wild. So they did that research. And so part of their recommendation was to ban outdoor cats. And so the only way that so if a cat wanted to be outdoor just as a dog, you can't, that they would have to be on a leash or in a carrier or something like that.
What's the enforcement mechanism for that? Because this seems like if this were to pass, it would be another one of those pointless ordinances that exists on the book and just there's really no way to.
People to leash their dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just, I was, BPRW staffed it, so I think they didn't necessarily get into all the specifics as far as enforcement, but I think one of the comments I remember made was just that there's a lot of rules and laws that are out there that don't necessarily always get enforced, but that doesn't stop you from having rules and laws in your society because not everything has got the ability to be enforced. I think I am guilty of not always driving the speed limit, I have to admit.
And certainly our judiciary has hammered that point quite well in recent months. Not everything can be enforced.
Thank you
You're
for the
welcome.
information. That was just, she's
in and sharing.
been participating in the community academy as well. And she just happened to walk out at an opportune time. So there's the story. So that means that they've created this ordinance. Once again, the form on cat licensing, roaming, and regulation. So I just, to the point, we know cats do their thing, but I just don't see how we rein this in. I don't see how we, I'm late to understanding what's going on here because when I was reading the ordinance to understand what feedback people would need to give, I literally couldn't believe what I was reading. I did have to go, I text Gene Bergman. I'm like, quick question, does this mean what I think it means? And he was like, yep. So yeah, spread the word. And I just, yeah.
And remember,
that
it was the kind of an odd timing due to the New Year's holiday. So our next meeting will be the regularly scheduled first Wednesday of the month, which is coming up, I think, in just 3 weeks. We have an extra Wednesday this month. I forgot about that. 3 weeks from today. So that gives us a little more time to prepare. And as a preview for that meeting, we will be having a candidate forum for city council and school board. We will also be talking about the charter change questions on the ballot, having gone over the bond issues tonight. And we will also hopefully be hearing from the school department on the school budget as well. And if you didn't catch it earlier, the school budget this year is actually projected to decrease by 2%, which is not something that happens very often. So,
yep. So we're happy to hear that. I am I think the presentation here on February 5th is going to be very meaty. It's about the laws and regulations that govern use of force, which I have sat through before. I'm interested in sitting through again as a kind of refresher. But I'm going to put something together. I'm going to make sure everybody, I'm also as a candidate, I am going to have statements on where I stand on all the measures. And I think if the ballot has to be done right around there because I believe the ballots start to go out the middle of February. If I'm not mistaken, but I'll look at those. No, I have to know those numbers.
my recollection from the presentation, the BTV Thrive presentation on January the 6th, was that the ballots would be mailed on February 10th, 11th, and 12th coming up. Yeah. And I was wondering, since we're on the topic of hearings, if you could expound a little bit on the hearings for the charter change. I think the first one was just this past Monday. It was kind of embedded within the city council, but a second hearing is coming up. And my understanding from our conversation previously is that the city council does have the ability to amend some of these proposed charter changes based on the feedback that they receive.
That is correct. That is correct. That's why it's really important for people who are concerned about the ordinance on the cats roaming. It's important for people to be vocal on that. It's the public's chance to do it. I mean, I plan on talking to Councilor Bergman and looking into the ordinances. That's his expertise in terms of what we can write up and what we can propose. So I'm going to be taking his lead on that. But we both think that this should be changed.
Hey, unless anyone else in the room has a question, I think we'll wrap it up here. Do you have Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Okay. We do have Raheem. Nora, go ahead. We'll slide over and give you that.
I would just like to quickly share and remind everyone that a winter warming shelter opened tonight at 5 p.m. 58 Pearl Street, being run by COTS. If you are currently unhoused and are looking for a low barrier shelter, please go to the day station at 95 North Avenue, Monday through Friday, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. for intake. Only service animals are allowed. Thank you.
And I'd just like to say thank you for everyone who came out tonight. I know we had some people head out, and just want to conclude the meeting by saying happy birthday, Dr. King. Thank you. And it's your birthday too?
Aw, Milo.
That's Mila's birthday on Monday too.
Oh, nice. Yay.
Yay.
Today's
Thank
actually
you.
his actual birthday. It's not he was born on the 15th, but we observe it on the Monday because it's, I guess, more convenient. But, and while we're on the history lesson here, it was on this day in 1777 that Vermont declared its independence. All right. Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was in March. No, that was when we became a state.
Correct.
My birthday is
March 4th.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to bounce off.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for coming.